Afternoon, everybody. Adam Mancuda here for the All Out Blitz. A little midweek check-in. Plenty of news around the NFL, college football. You got the hurricane that's impacting games. Tons to get to. Let's do a little recap here where we stand midweek, heading into games that actually start tonight in college football. Some news and notes right off the bat. Bryce Love, the Heisman contender from Stanford, out this week against UC Davis. Couple that with his poor performance in Week 1 against San Diego State, and Bryce Love may already be out of consideration for that Heisman race. For those in DFS leagues or yearly college fantasy football leagues, Love is a huge miss this week. You will have Cameron Scarlett in for the Cardinal. He did score 8 touchdowns last season, so he's a great plug-and-play guy this week in both yearly and DFS formats. I grabbed him myself in my yearly league and will definitely start him against UC Davis. I still think Stanford puts up a ton of points and covers whatever the spread may be. But big news there. Another big blow for Oklahoma. Heisman Trophy candidate, at least in my opinion, Rodney Anderson, who was dynamic last season, out for the season with an injury. Trey Sermon will step into that lead back role. I think he dominates the carries moving forward. You got to remember something now with Oklahoma. It's kind of one of those rotating doors of talent. So Sermon, while not as good as Anderson, might develop into that really solid back. So he's someone I would be really interested in having. Some other news, if you're just getting caught up in terms of some NFL news, Marcus Mariota a little bit banged up. He may play this week. He may not. Delaney Walker, his number one weapon for the Titans, out for the season. Huge blow for the Titans. They really don't have another tight end complement there. They have Jonnu Smith. But again, he's not someone that you would plug and have the utmost faith in delivering as much potential as Delaney Walker. Another big piece of news out of Buffalo. Josh Allen is in at starting quarterback for Nathan Peterman. We all knew that Peterman was kind of being thrown to the wolves last week against the Ravens. So it begs the question, why was Josh Allen not playing last week? No one can give us the answer. Was it because they didn't want his first game to be at Baltimore? Okay, I understand. Do you want it to not be on the road against a team that's hungry to prove last season when they got pushed out of the playoffs that they're not weak? Okay, I understand that. But to just have him sit and learn for one game doesn't make much sense. So the more things change in Buffalo, the more they actually stay the same. So a couple of big notes there, and we're obviously all keeping a very close eye on Aaron Rodgers' injury. I expect him to play this week in a showdown against the Vikings. We'll touch on that a little bit later. Little transition here to some college football picks. As we know, Hurricane Florence is going to batter the Eastern Coast this week, impacting tons of games. You have UCF that's been canceled already. Boston College has moved their game up. So check your schedules again and your lineups for DFS and yearly leagues before you set them this week because of that storm. But here are some early week gleans. I like LSU getting 9 points against Auburn. You know these teams always play close games. LSU has been better this season defensively. They've looked actually somewhat startable for some offenses and players in DFS on the offensive side of the ball. I like them to keep this close against Auburn. I think 9 points is way too much. Hawaii, their first trip to the mainland this year, they've run up tons of points against Rice, against Navy, against Colorado State. I expect them to travel okay coming east. They are facing Army. They're not facing Michigan or a top defense like Georgia or Alabama. So I do expect them to go over 40, and I think they're getting a touchdown at Army is great. I think they'll win the game outright, let alone 7 points. Syracuse, a little homer pick here. We saw what happened to Florida State last week. They should have lost and could have lost to Samford, whose quarterback threw for almost 400 yards. And what does Syracuse do well? Throw the ball. Give me the field goal. I think Syracuse wins outright. They almost won at Florida State last year, so I expect them to reverse that this year and get a win, 4 to 7 points, the range. So I like them to there. Ole Miss hosting Alabama. I just think 3 touchdowns is way too much here. Alabama probably is going to be motivated to show the rest of the country that they are still the class of the SEC, and I get that. But what Ole Miss does have is talent at receiver. They have Lodge, and they got A.J. Brown, not to mention a very solid quarterback who's played outstanding to start the year. They put up 70-plus points last week. I think they score enough to keep this game within 3 touchdowns, so I'll roll with Ole Miss. And Wisconsin, I'm sorry, this rushing attack is sensational. Taylor leads the country in rushing yards and touchdowns entering this week. I don't think that he will be stopped against BYU. I expect him to go well over 150 yards with 2 or 3 scores. Give me Wisconsin with 3 touchdowns. Transitioning to the NFL a little bit. Guys I'm watching this week. Leonard Fournette got a little bit banged up against the Giants in the opener. He probably will play this week, but how limited will he be? If he does sit, how much does that impact TJ Yeldon against the Pats, who completely shut down the Texans offense for the most part last week? Very interested there. Rodgers is the big name. Is he going to play? That entire game and that point spread will shift a handful of points based on whether or not he's playing. Right now, as of this morning, the Packers were a 1-point favorite. So if you think the Packers are going to win this game with Rodgers, jump on that now, because if Rodgers does play, I could see that line going to 3-4 points. So expect that line to obviously shift backwards and make Minnesota the favorite if it is deemed that he's out, but I do expect him to play, which means stock up for Geronimo Allison, Devontae Adams, Randall Cobb, and Jamal Williams. Another guy I'm keeping an eye on, Marcus Mariota, banged up against the Dolphins, down a weapon. I stay away from him completely in both yearly and DFS. I do think it impacts the point spread. Mariota is probably good for 3-4 points in the offense because Blaine Gabbert is terrible. So if you're going to roll the dice on the Titans, let's make sure Mariota's in terms of betting that game moving forward. Then you got Sam Darnold. Can he do it again? The magical rookie that the Jets now anoint as the next Joe Namath. Let's see him do it again against the Dolphins. Not a bad matchup. The Dolphins did play really well against the Titans, but again, those conditions weren't the best for throwing the ball, especially during those storms. So let's see how Darnold does. And the last name on the list is Sony Michel. Hopefully he's back for the Pats this week. Sat out week 1. With the injury to Jeremy Hill that landed him on IR, I expect Michel to be back. And in a game where they play with solid athletes on the defensive side with Jacksonville, they're going to need Michel to pound the rock inside, catch the ball out of the backfield, and be another compliment to Brady in that passing game. So more to check on there with Michel and see how he performs. But week 2 storylines, we just touched on it. AFC title game rematch. Pats and Jags. I think the Pats actually have an advantage here for 2 reasons. One, the Jaguars weren't able to do much on offense, even with Fournette in the game last week against the Giants. I expect the Patriots, now they have the advantage. Remember, they have now seen how the Jaguars attack them on defense, and they know how to defend the Jaguars on offense, which I think is very key. But you know Belichick is going to switch things up, so the Jaguars aren't going to have to be able to rely on the tape from last year. I think the Patriots will go to town on that tape from last year. I think that's an advantage there. And again, remember something else. Brady already played this game without Edelman in the AFC title game. He now gets, again, no Edelman now, but maybe Sony Michel shows up. You're going to have Corey Coleman potentially active, which is another deep weapon to try to potentially stretch the defense. Let's see what happens there. They need Chris Hogan to step up this week. 1 catch, 11 yards in the opener. They'll need him big time. Giants and Cowboys, who's going to start 0-2? Either Jason Garrett's going to be on the hot seat, or all the optimism that was there at the beginning of the season for the Giants will not be there anymore. So big game in Big D on Sunday Night Football. Jimmy G versus Stafford. Which one of these star quarterbacks is going to go 0-2? Is it going to be Jimmy G, who everyone was anointing the next Tom Brady, or Stafford, who was one of the richest quarterbacks in the NFL and then laid an egg there on Monday night against the Jets? Big game for one of those teams to avoid going 0-2. Ravens and Bengals for 2-0. Both teams had solid wins in the opener. I was more impressed, obviously, with Cincinnati going on the road, coming back against Andrew Luck and Indianapolis. The Ravens put a hurting on the Bills, but the Bills stink. So is that really impressive? I don't think so. One of these teams, though, 2-0 after the Thursday night game. Get those guys in your lineups. I do think A.J. Green and Joe Mixon have to play. You're going to play Alex Collins. Then again, I think you also have options like John Ross and Michael Crabtree available for you on the Ravens to play in your wide receiver 3 or flex spots. And you know what? In a week where weather might be in condition, or you're down Marcus Mariota or someone else on your team, Joe Flacco is not the worst option here. You saw what Andrew Luck did in a dink and dunk fashion for the Colts against the Bengals last week. I don't think Flacco is that bad of an option this week. And the final one, Fantasy Bonanza. This week, it's Chiefs and Pittsburgh. Last week it was Chiefs and Chargers. Get a theme there? I think the Steelers awaken even more. You know, Big Ben threw a ton of interceptions last week, but James Conner was electric. Now I think better weather in Pittsburgh, hopefully this weekend. Big Ben goes for over 300. The Chiefs' defense is still not that good. Rivers went off against them last week. If you look at the box score, you had all types of bonanza stuff going on. Melvin Gordon had 8 catches. You had Keenan Allen going for 8 catches and more. And again, you saw what Patrick Mahomes did. I think this has 34-31 written all over it. Haven't made the pick in terms of which team wins yet, but I do think it goes over the number, which I believe right now is 54 or 55. So I think that is certainly one that will go over. And obviously, as this week goes on, we're going to address more players on the waiver wire. Randall Cobb, Geronimo Allison. Those guys are on the top of my list this week, especially if Rodgers plays. I almost said Favre. Then you got Alex Smith, who again is a great, not a bye week because there are no bye weeks, but injury fill-in for a guy like Mariota or bad weather fill-in. He did very admirable last week against the Arizona Cardinals defense. He now gets a solid opponent this week, so in the Colts, so I expect him to have a good week. You got Jared Cook, who went off against the Rams last week with the injuries to Delaney Walker and Greg Olsen, is a stud free agent replacement for you in yearly leagues at tight end. And you got TJ Yeldon, because again, if Leonard Fournette does not play against the Patriots. You know the Patriots are susceptible to running backs out of the backfield. I think he's got a lot of skills there. He scored last week against the Giants. And for all that and many more throughout the week, certainly hit me up at the Fantasy Forum, on the Fantasy Forum, and on Sunday mornings, 11:45 to 1 on the All Out Blitz. I'm Adam Kuda. Get those picks in. We'll keep talking during the week about strategy. And if you're in the Carolina area, be safe. Don't do anything stupid. Get out of your house. Watch me on Sunday morning. We'll all have fun. And good luck to all you. Hope everyone is safe out there. Thanks a lot.